Okay, good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us on Edmentum's virtual conference, Building School Around Every Student. I'm going to let everyone have just a few seconds to join the session, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. Just so you know, I am Hayley Peterson. I am one of the marketing specialists here at Edmentum in Minneapolis. I'm going to be in the background of today's presentation, making sure all of your questions are answered. So it looks like we have quite a few people who have joined. So let's go ahead and get started because we have a very exciting and jam-packed agenda for you today. So I'm going to go ahead and go over some quick housekeeping, and then I'm going to turn it over to Edmentum's CEO, Jamie Candy. So first, with any virtual experience, sometimes technical issues can happen. If you're experiencing issues with audio or visual, please let us know in the chat. And if for some reason we get kicked off the webinar today, we're going to go and get back up and running as soon as possible, and you can rejoin the webinar with the link you used to join today. Next, you will be muted throughout the presentation, so if you're having any audio issues, please check your device volume, the audio settings in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, or please call in by telephone. The number can be found in the webinar confirmation email that was sent to you when you registered for today's session. So now let's take a look at the attendee interface. Right now we're looking at an example of the Zoom webinar control panel. This should be located at the bottom of your screen. This control panel will help you participate in today's webinar. So by clicking on that chat feature, you can expand the chat to the right-hand side of your screen. In this chat panel, you can add comments on today's presentation for our presenters. We have a very interactive presentation for you this morning, so we're excited to see what you have to say in there. And right now, feel free to go ahead and introduce yourselves and let us know what schools and districts you're from. All right, and then next, by clicking that Q&A feature, that opens up the questions pane where you have the ability to send us any questions on today's presentation. And then the last two features that I want to point out are the audio settings and how to exit today's session. On the left-hand side of your screen is the audio settings. And if you're having any audio issues, we suggest you check that out first. But if that's still not working, go ahead and let us know in the chat. And then lastly, when today's session is over, you can go ahead and exit the webinar using the leave button. Okay, perfect. So that's it for my housekeeping. And now I would love to pass it over to Edmentum's CEO, Jamie Candy, to kick off Edmentum's first ever virtual conference. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Hayley. Well, good morning, everyone. I know for some of you on the West Coast, it's quite early this morning, so we so appreciate you being with us today. This is our first ever 100% virtual conference at Edmentum, and we're calling it Building School Around Every Student. And we think now more than ever, that is the most important thing all of us as educators can be focused on. And so as I was reflecting today on how I wanted to greet you this morning, there's one thing that came to mind that I think is important for us to start the day. And the word that came to mind last night and this morning as I was reflecting is grateful. I want you to know that at Edmentum, we are here to serve you. We are here to partner with you. And in this time, as we are all figuring out new models, new implementation, new instructional strategies, we are so grateful to all of the educators in this country and abroad. We have many international partners at Edmentum as well that are joining us. We are so grateful for the work that you did over the spring. We are so grateful for how you've stepped back during a summer when you should be taking a break because this has been very, very hard, this global pandemic on everyone. But you've stepped back and you've said, how am I going to serve my kids in the fall? And so as we go through today's sessions, we want you to know that this is very much about how we can support you and some of the instructional strategies that you are considering as you embark on an academic year that none of us have ever experienced in our careers and our lifetime. And so we're so grateful to have you here today. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to be with us, to be with each other. So what we're going to focus on today is we've got a panel of educators across the country, a whole spectrum of topics. We're going to have 16 different sessions, and we're going to have lots of time to reflect and focus on educational leadership with all of you, our leaders, how to battle learning loss, contingency planning, and how to think through different models, different ways. We call it flip the switch, bricks to clicks, I keep hearing across the country as well. Edmentum is really well suited for this moment. We are celebrating our 60th anniversary this year. As many of you know, we started as a research project at the University of Illinois 60 years ago. And in these 60 years, we have spent an inordinate amount of time figuring out when virtual is required, either by student or family choice or out of circumstances like we find ourselves in now. How do we bring you the very best models for implementation and instructional support and programming to ensure that in a blended and virtual environment, you have what you need as an educator to be effective for direct instruction, for differentiated instruction, for personalized learning. So we're very, very excited to talk about many different topics today. And we're very excited to start this morning with somebody who I admire greatly. So I'm very, very pleased to kick off today's conference and introduce you to somebody who has a national spotlight on him very frequently. What I appreciate most about Matt Norman is he is incredibly thoughtful around how you as an individual, as a human, take the time to really reflect on who you are, how you get through difficult challenges, and how you emerge as a better person than you were before. So I'm very pleased to introduce you to Matt Norman. He is the president and CEO of Norman & Associates. It's based here in lovely Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we are having an amazing summer. Matt offers custom coaching, consulting in the areas of talent, personal effectiveness, planning, and goal alignment. He is truly an incredible speaker. He is a wonderful human being. He has worked with Edmentum for a number of years, and we find him so valuable both for us internally. We call ourselves Edmentors, and there's so many different professional conferences that we offer to our Edmentors, and Matt is frequently our keynote speaker. And every single time, after all of the different sessions, Matt's session always emerges as the most valued session of any panel that we have or any speaking engagement that we have. So today, Matt is going to talk to us about emerging stronger from challenges and uncertainty. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce you to Matt Norman. Matt, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm grateful for you and for our friendship and your leadership. I'm sitting here, I'm emotional, Jamie, watching all of the names and locations scroll through the chat. It's just incredible to see the representation geographically across age demographics and just thinking about the changes and challenges that you just referenced that this group has experienced and will continue to experience in the coming months. I recently got a text from a good friend of mine here in Minneapolis who is a middle school band teacher who said, Matt, I'm currently in the hardest time of my entire life right now. And I got another text from a friend because he knew how humbled I was to be doing this presentation this morning. He texted me, he's a friend from Dallas, Texas. He said, Matt, knock those teachers dead this morning. He said, actually, don't do that. We need our teachers right now. And so I'm just so grateful to be here. It is a very challenging time and an opportunity for all of us to reflect this morning on how we can emerge stronger from the challenges and uncertainty that we face. If we look back to the spring when things started to change based on COVID, we thought that we were building a bridge to August. We saw a bend in the curve. We thought things were going to normalize. And for many of us instead, it feels like we've built a pier. It feels for many of us like we're stuck. Perhaps for you, like my friend here in Minneapolis, this may be a very difficult time. There's a lot of realities that we're facing right now. To this point, there's still a lacking of funds to do the things that we need to do to have safe and effective classrooms in person. Yet there's an insistence that we do in-person classrooms as much as possible, and there's not really a detailed plan to protect those who are vulnerable. And let's face it, parents are stretched thin too. There's a limited capacity to help, and it's really difficult. I've worked with a lot of teachers over the last several months who have said, I struggle to engage my students in distance learning. Last week, I saw a study that said 75% of teachers right now say they are moderately or extremely worried. I wonder for you, what challenges are you facing right now? What reality are you facing? Let's look in the chat at some of the responses. Hayley, if you would, just put a break in the chat, and all of us, please write in the chat, what's a reality that you're facing? What's a challenge that you're experiencing right now? Perhaps you can relate to some of the realities that we just showed on the screen. Please indicate in the chat, what's one reality that you're facing right now? This is going to be, as Hayley mentioned, an interactive session. We're hoping to hear from a lot of people. It's one of the benefits of being on Zoom in a virtual manner. We see that Lola says implementing instruction effectively right now. Wendy adds, opening fully without feeling completely safe. Yeah, thanks. Monica Santiago adds fear among teachers, students, families, so many challenges. And Lewis says that getting kids motivated. Christy adds that there's a technology gap right now. So many, thank you for the responses coming in, for the honesty, the candor that's coming in. Wow, it's, Hayley, what are you seeing in there? There's just so many responses. I see Kim adding that it's just difficult without a lot of safety equipment. Hayley, if you want to unmute yourself and maybe just pick another response that's resonating with you as they're scrolling through the chat.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely seeing anxiety, which I can definitely feel for, and for the, you know, choice for students and technology access. Like I can completely understand keeping calm
Hayley,
and stress-free.
yes, Hayley and Matt, we're seeing a lot around Maslow's hierarchy, right? Which Matt, you and I have talked about this in a number of different contexts, a lot around just providing for all of the well-being that so many teachers know is important for their students and their communities.
Yeah, and to that point, it's difficult to do to achieve some of the higher level needs like relationships and self-actualization if we're not achieving those more foundational needs. So thank you for that. And let's face it, a lot of us feel like we're climbing up the side of a mountain right now. And we realize, though, as we're climbing, that challenge is inevitable. Certainly right now, it's inevitable. It's going to continue. Another friend of mine who runs a preschool near me said, man, I think we're actually entering into the most challenging phase of the pandemic right now. And so we know that the question for all of us is, are we going to grow? Growth is what's optional. We will be challenged. The question is, will we have a growth mindset? But then we have to ask ourselves, if we're going to grow, what are we growing toward? If we're trying to scale the side of a mountain, what are we trying to achieve? What's at the top? Will this be worth it? Perhaps we feel like Alice in Alice in Wonderland when she's anxious and misdirected and she approaches the Cheshire Cat and says, which way should I go right now? And he gives profound advice to Alice. He says, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. I wonder for a lot of us as we're anxious and maybe even feeling reactive and a bit aimless right now, perhaps we could begin by taking instruction from the Cheshire Cat and thinking, what's our vision? What are we wanting to grow toward right now in this environment? Now, granted, we can't control everything that will happen to us in the future, yet we can control where we want to go. We can at least have a vision in our minds despite the challenges. I wonder for you and for me, where do we want to see ourselves in 6 months despite the challenges? Please write in the chat where you would see yourself in 6 months. Carrie Dunsworth, I wonder for you, where do you see yourself as you envision, despite all the challenges that we're facing, where do you see yourself in 6 months from today?
Well, thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation. I'm Carrie, the event manager here at Edmentum. One of the biggest struggles for me right now, you asked earlier is, as a single parent, how do I balance work life and my kids' education? So really in 6 months, I just would like to have a better idea of what that's going to look like for my children, what school's going to look like for them, and just if I could have a crystal ball, like what would that look like? And just have a better idea of what that balance is.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. It sounds like clarity, which a lot of us can relate to, and stability.
Yes, stability.
Yeah. A parent that we're managing not just our own needs, but the needs of others. Thank you, Carrie, for your candor there. And Ella says in the chat that a classroom free of anxiety and a place to learn. Suman says, I'd like to have my students confident in their learning. Yeah, Mark adds that growing as a laboratory coordinator and as an adult educator, that I am growing. So step one, perhaps for many of us, despite the challenges that we're facing right now, is not to just take the reactive vision that is imposed upon us by others, but rather for us to create our own vision, to take the advice of the Cheshire Cat and establish where we want to go. We see several responses in the chat of where we may want to go despite many of the challenges. Once we establish where we want to go, the next step is to take action. You see, vision is realized twice. It's realized in our minds as we picture that place in the future that, for example, Carrie and others just described, and it's realized in our actions as we make it a reality. So the next question we should each consider this morning is, what actions will get you to where you want to go? What are the key actions that you will need to take over the next 6 months or so to be able to move towards your vision? What do you have agency over? What can you control in the next 6 months? Now, as Jamie mentioned, I coach hundreds of people a year and work with groups on taking action to achieve their vision. And what I've determined is that there are 4 key patterns, 4 actions that I've written in my upcoming book, The 4 Patterns of Healthy People, which if you're interested in learning more about me, you can go to mattnorman.com and we can continue the dialogue around these potential actions. But let's review these 4 actions today. First of all, that we would focus on our best thoughts. So we have an option. We have a choice of which thoughts we will focus on, and that we would clarify in the midst of all of the anxiety, Facebook groups that we may be part of, where we're all posting our feelings and hearing other people's feelings, maybe people that we live with and our neighbors, that we would clarify who we are amidst all of the anxiety that we're facing, and that we would also remain open to change during this difficult time and ultimately emerge stronger. You see, sports psychologists tell us that the first thing that we need to do to remain calm and focused, pursuing our vision in the midst of anxiety, is have metacognition. Metacognition is a psychological term that suggests that we can pay attention to our own thoughts. Just last night, I was driving my 13-year-old son to a baseball game, and he told me, he said, "Dad, right now I'm having 2 competing thoughts." He said, "It's the last game of the season, and one thought is self-doubt. I have thoughts of insecurity going through my mind." He said, "At the same time, I have thoughts of confidence, because in our last game, I made a really good hit." Is it strange, Dad, that I have both thoughts of self-doubt and confidence at the same time? Well, sports psychologists would say that our minds are like a river with leaves constantly dropping in, and all of those leaves represent thoughts. Imagine the stream of thoughts that are going through your mind right now and that have been going through your mind, where red leaves represent thoughts that drain us, that distract us, that take away our energy, that whisper doubt into our minds. Whereas green thoughts are those that embolden us, empower us, and give us confidence. My friend Paul was just texting me yesterday. He's a middle school science teacher. And he said, in the same text thread, "The entire thing is a mess. Am I supposed to teach the kids online or the kids at school, or both?" And then in the same text thread, he had a different thought. He said, "Matt, our congressman made good statements on this. We have good leadership." 2 competing thoughts in the same text string. Hayley, I wonder for you, as you think about the thoughts that go through your mind, what's a red thought that you maybe have found or may expect to find floating through the river of your thoughts in the coming months?
Yeah, I think I definitely am experiencing a lot of uncertainty and anxiety right now. I have the tendency to spend a little bit too much time reading the news, which kind of makes me feel like I have no control and gives me that like feeling in my chest that's really tight. So I think that's definitely a red thought for me. I've noticed that when I, read the news too much, I get too much anxiety.
Yeah. Those what if catastrophic thoughts or helpless thoughts. Yeah, thanks, Hayley. Now, contrast that with what's a green leaf that may float through your mind that might give you more energy, cause you to feel more empowered and have more agency.
Yeah, so I think something that, makes me feel good is that, I'm educating myself on the current situation that we're all going through. And I've been trying really hard to focus on, building a new schedule for myself and focusing on the things that I can control versus what I can't.
Yeah.
So that's definitely given me more energy and made me feel a little bit like more at peace right now.
Yeah, so to say, I do have control. I can't control everything, but I can control my schedule to a certain degree, or I can control certain commitments that I make during the day. Thanks for that, Hayley. The reality is all of these red thoughts and green thoughts are part of who we are. We don't want to reject the red thoughts or completely ignore them, but we can recognize that while they're part of who we are, we have the choice as to which thoughts we'll focus on. Let's let the red thoughts float on by. That was my instruction to my son Luke last night. Luke, it's okay that you're having thoughts of self-doubt. That's part of who you are. That's normal. Just let those thoughts float down the river and instead focus on the green thoughts. Let's, Hayley, put a break in the chat and all write in the chat, what's a green thought that you could focus on or that you have been focused on recently? Please write, and thanks, Christy, for your red thought, the thought that I don't know what I'm actually doing. A lot of us can relate to that. Please write, if you would be willing to, and certainly no pressure. If you don't want to write anything in the chat, that's okay too. But please write a green thought, a thought that may be energizing, empowering, that you have had or that you could have going forward. You see lots of thoughts coming through. We see Sativia says, this is an opportunity for me to learn and grow. Nancy adds the same thing. Dave says, I'm seeing my students again. Yeah, so many thoughts. Hayley, what's another green thought there that you're seeing? I see the we can do this together. Hayley, what else do you see in there?
I'm seeing a lot of really awesome responses about support systems, which I think is really, really great. I think that sometimes when we are spent in so much isolation, we kind of forget about how many people love us and care about us.
Yeah, that's really well said. It's such an important point. Elizabeth adds that there are parent advocates. You see, we can choose. We can't choose what's happening to us, but we can choose which thoughts we will focus on. Thank you for those contributions to the chat. I'd invite everyone just to read other people's green thoughts and be encouraged and consider what green thoughts we could be focusing on in our mind. Again, not beating ourselves up about the red thoughts, not thinking there's something wrong with us because of the red thoughts, but just letting the red leaves float by and focusing on the green leaves. Now, another thing that we have control over is our own self-definition, our own boundaries. It reminds me that when things are anxious and that when we're fatigued, oftentimes it's difficult to clarify, what do we think in all of this? For example, I was mentioning my friend who was a middle school band teacher. He forwarded me a link to the local Facebook group where everyone was contributing, all these teachers were contributing their ideas about how we were going to conduct a pandemic safe experience or distance learning. And I wonder if when we're in these groups or these threads, if it's hard to even sometimes know which thoughts are my own. It reminds me of when my youngest daughter was born. We had trouble getting pregnant and having a child, and so we were amazed and anxious when this youngest daughter was born. And because we had lost several children to miscarriages, we had chosen a name coming into the delivery, but hadn't told anybody. And when my parents arrived at the hospital, we were fatigued and anxious, and they said, "What's the child's name?" And I said, "It's Matilda." And my dad, he kind of chuckled. He said, "Is that a joke?" And you see, my dad thought I was being funny. And he said, "Well, it's just kind of an old-fashioned name in my mind." And it planted the seed of self-doubt in my head. I thought, oh my gosh, did we choose the wrong name? Is this going to be a problem for our child? And so I wrestled over the next few days, and none of my thoughts were my own thoughts. They were my parents' thoughts that were being imposed on me. And I convinced my wife we should change her name to Madeline, because I looked up on the top 10 most common names at that time. Madeline was one of the top names, very similar to Matilda. And it wasn't until about 6 months later that I was sitting at the kitchen table and my wife made a comment. I said, "Are you disappointed in what we named our daughter?" And she said, "Yeah, I feel like it was a real loss." She said, "You know, Matilda, we chose for a reason. Matilda means strength in battle. And we chose that because this was the child that made it despite all of our fertility challenges." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. You know, those weren't my own thoughts. Those were my parents' thoughts. I need to take a stand for what I think." And so within weeks, I had us at the county courthouse, and we officially changed my daughter's name from Madeline back to Matilda, the name that it should be. I wonder for each of us, where do we need to put boundaries up around who we are despite all of the voices and the anxiety around us? Here are a few ideas for us to do this. One of the most human, empowering things to do is state your needs and communicate your feelings. It seems obvious, and yet a lot of times we're not clear. In fact, I'd invite all of us right now just to verbalize that. We're on mute. No one will hear us. Perhaps maybe there's somebody in our room with us, but just to say, right now, I need blank, and I'm feeling blank. For example, as I think about this right now, I need space on my calendar. I'm doing too much, and I'm feeling anxious right now. That's true about me right now. I wonder what's true about you. There's something empowering and something very human about setting the definition, clarifying who we are in the midst of our needs and feelings. Now, as other people bring their anxiety to us, as students, parents, other teachers, administrators, neighbors, friends, we have to realize that the temptation that many of us have, especially being in a helping profession, to rescue other people from their problems. You see, that's called over-functioning. Over-functioning is doing for somebody what they can or should be doing for themselves. I wonder how many of us over-function at times. Now, that's different from just legitimately helping people. We like to help people, but what does it look like for us when we overfunction, when we rescue other people or absorb their anxiety? When there's anxiety around us, you see, we think that we're actually helping by taking on their anxiety. But yeah, I'm anxious too. I'm going to be anxious with you. We think that that's empathetic and helpful. But as Edwin Friedman says in his book, A Failure of Nerve, the great late psychologist, Edwin Friedman says, actually, we amplify the anxiety in the system when we absorb other people's anxiety. It's not the most loving response. It's also not the most loving response to triangulate ourselves in the midst of other relationships. Perhaps there's something that needs to happen between a fellow teacher and administrator, or between two other teachers, or between two sets of families or parents, or maybe they're neighbors. And we have a desire sometimes to jump into that, to triangulate, to create a triangle instead of what should be a direct line between two people. And as a result, we tend to amplify the anxiety in the system. You know, all of these are forms of lacking self-definition. It's lacking boundaries. And so we need to clarify who we are in the midst of this. Hayley, I think we have a poll, don't we, where we could ask the group, which of these 5 ideas for you might be most useful towards pursuing your vision in 6 months? Which of these ideas is going to be most helpful? Please just go ahead and write or click on which of those checkboxes for you. We'll give the group about another 10 seconds here and see which of these ideas for you might collaborate and contribute most to your clarity of who you are in the midst of this anxiety and challenges. Hayley, let's go ahead and close that poll.
I'm going to close that poll out, and I'll share the results with everyone.
Wow, we see that the most people are perhaps tempted to absorb other people's anxiety, and that by committing to not taking on the anxiety of others, perhaps that would be a way for us to sustain our own mental health and our own energy and our own priorities as we pursue our vision. And then follow closely behind from that is communicating your feelings, telling people, I am feeling scared right now, that I am feeling concerned, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling upset. Sometimes just by communicating those feelings, it can help us to, again, have more agency. Now, someone who I communicated my feelings to not long ago was when I went through marriage counseling with my wife. We were stuck in a few areas. And so I met with the marriage counselor, and he proceeded to suggest to me some things that I might consider doing differently. And despite his wisdom and years of experience, I kept justifying and rationalizing the things that he was saying. You know, he would suggest something and I'd say, yeah, but you don't understand what she sometimes does in our marriage that frustrates me. Or, you know, you don't understand the family I grew up in. This is the way that we always did things. Or I'd say, you know, but my personality is wired that way. That's just the way that I am. I don't have time to do that. I had all of these rationalizations. I wonder for each of us, how much we're tempted right now to defend, to rationalize, to justify. The marriage counselor said to me, stopped me in my tracks after all this defending. He said, Matt, being defensive is the weakest posture. I thought, wow, am I being defensive? I wonder for each of us what it might look like in the coming months for us to be curious rather than defensive, rather than trying to rationalize or justify ourselves, that we would listen more, that we would ask more questions, that we would be open to coaching, that we'd be open to criticism, that we'd be open to suggestions. Now, this can be hard because we often have triggers. We have hot buttons. Someone says something and we want to react. I was just talking with a colleague yesterday who got some feedback from his instruction. And he said, I'm not going to take feedback from her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. He said, I'm sorry. I'm being triggered right now because I don't like to take feedback on my instruction. Let's write in the chat, what might be a trigger or a hot button that for you might be important to recognize because it may be making you defensive. Please go ahead and write in the chat, what would be a trigger or hot button? Or a different question that you could respond to is, what might it even just look like to have a more open posture? Heidi writes that teachers are being blamed for the decisions of the administration. Yeah, that can be a trigger. So when I get blamed for the administration's decisions, I may want to be defensive. Perhaps for us, maybe the posture should just be open. Okay, I'll take that. It wasn't my decision, but I'm not going to rationalize that. Tell me what you're feeling. That Jessica writes, trusting our leadership more. That maybe an open posture would be to say, you know, I may not agree with everything that our leadership has done, but rather than rationalizing and justifying, I'm going to maintain an open posture. When Sandra writes, I'm given too much responsibility, not enough direction. Yeah, you have all of the responsibility and not enough authority. Or we have all of the responsibility yet not enough direction. And that can be a trigger for us to say, well, you've given me this responsibility, but not the resources. You've given me the expectation, but not the direction. So I'm going to get defensive. But maybe for us, it might just be to ask a question. Okay, what can I do? Jacqueline writes, understanding that we're all going through uncertain times and that I need to be patient. Thanks, Jacqueline, for adding that. I was meeting with a coach of mine yesterday, and he said, Matt, perhaps the word for you right now is patience. Patience with yourself, patience with others, that might contribute to a more open posture. Bernice says that they didn't work with me on this issue. Yeah, this issue, I had to handle this issue on my own. You're not working with me. And yet maybe for us, rather than being triggered by that we would be curious rather than defensive. One of the great important steps that many of us can make in the coming months is to be aware of our triggers and our hot buttons. The things that make us shut down, the things that make us close ourselves off, the things that make us go into fight, flight, or freeze because I don't want to hear it. And maybe for us, it's recognizing those triggers and then deciding to be curious rather than defensive. When we do that, we can then emerge stronger. As we emerge stronger, there's a number of ideas that we may want to consider. One of the ideas that we could consider as we emerge stronger is sleep. I recently read an article in Men's Health magazine from a top fitness guru who said the best performance-enhancing drug you can take is sleep. Research from the Stanford University Institute for Sleep suggests that over 99.5% of the human population requires at least 7 hours of quality sleep. Stanford has indicated that what can detract from quality sleep are things like screens. Having a screen in front of our face before we fall asleep activates parts of our brain that make it harder for us to enter deep, restorative REM sleep. So perhaps we're tempted to be looking at that Facebook group before bed, but Stanford suggests that we need to have no screens within 30 minutes before going to bed. 30 minutes is what's required at a minimum for our brains to quiet down. Alcohol is another one. Sometimes we're tempted to have that glass of wine to help us go to sleep. And the reality is that studies show that more than one drink a night can deteriorate substantially our quality of sleep, even for some of us, even one drink. Now, I'm not telling people how to live their lives. Certainly each of us can make our own choices. But the question is, how much quality sleep are we getting? Because as we're trying to achieve this vision in the next 6 months, that may be our best performance-enhancing drug for us to emerge stronger. Hayley, I think we have a poll on this, don't we? Let's see.
We do.
What's the average amount of sleep that you're getting right now? The average amount of quality sleep that you're getting. Please click on one of those items in the poll. It'd be interesting to hear from the group and just get a sense. Where are you right now in terms of your sleep? Let's give the group another 20 seconds or so to respond to those questions. Where are you right now? Mm-hmm. Hayley, you were telling me recently that you're in a phase where you're getting a lot of sleep right now. How do you make it happen where you're able to get a lot of sleep right now?
Oh, I just really like sleep. So I set myself an alarm at 9:30 and I get ready for bed. And then I sleep until the last possible moment I have to. And
That's
you know,
great.
I'm a fan of the snooze button, let me tell you.
Yeah, you know what you're talking about reminds me of James Clear in his book Atomic Habits. Says that one of the important things that we can do is habit stack, where we stack certain reminders like setting an alarm. I'm always going to start shutting things down at 9:30, and then I'm going to stretch, and then I'm going to read. And then, you know, these are the things that we do. I'm going to pour myself a glass of water. James Clear says in Atomic Habits that as we habit stack, we tend to be more consistent in achieving the results that we want to. Looks like the highest average here is 6 to 7 hours of sleep. Hopefully we're on the higher end of that. Again, according to the Stanford Institute for Sleep, 7 hours is the minimum. That if we are getting less than 7 hours of quality sleep, it's probably detracting from our ability to make good decisions and sustain our energy during the day, at least over multiple consecutive days. Also, we're seeing many comments in the chat. Carrie Desworth, I wonder if you could just take a look at the chat and see if you're seeing any comments about the hours of sleep that we're getting. We do see this kind of this bell curve. It looks like there are some of us in the group that are really getting a lot less sleep than 7 hours, and others of us are maybe getting a lot more sleep. Carrie, what's one comment that's jumping out to you in the chat right now?
What we're seeing is about 6 to 7. Yeah. Seems to be the average, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, according to research, we want at least 7 hours of quality sleep. And in addition to sleep, another restful behavior is to do inner work. What do we mean by inner work? Well, inner work is working on our insides. You see, there's a lot of focus in our society on working on our outsides, looking more beautiful or maybe more healthy on our outsides, looking like we've got it put together. But the reality is there's not a lot of focus in our society on doing work on our insides. And I wonder for each of us, what's one thing that you might benefit from doing more consistently? What's something that you could add to your habit stack in the weeks and months ahead that would strengthen you, that would build confidence, that would encourage you, that would fill you with more energy? Maybe it's journaling, prayer, meditation, going on a retreat. Perhaps it's reading or something that, listening to music, being in nature. Hayley, what's one thing for you as you think about doing inner work, things that strengthen you, that give you energy, that make you whole, that remind you of who you really are? What's something that would be a key for you, Hayley?
Yeah, I was just talking about this with my therapist the other day, actually, about how bullet journaling has been a huge part of my life for the last like 5 years. I've just filled bullet journal after bullet journal. And this year it's really been hard because you don't really know what the next week is going to look like.
Yeah.
So we've worked really hard on kind of flipping the script on that and saying, okay, what can we control? What can we look forward to? And continue to use that bullet journal because it's a really big part of my life. So
Wow.
I'm working on that.
Hayley, what is a bullet journal?
Yeah, so it is like kind of a journal that does everything. It's a habit tracker. It tracks my daily gratitudes. It tracks, events and things that I have going on in the future. I track my budget on it, like lots and lots of things. Yeah, it's my personal Bible.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. We see other responses that Laura Lee says, I love bullet journals. That's awesome. Stephanie says, being good to myself. Yeah, just starting our day saying, how am I going to do self-care today? What am I going to do to be good to myself? Elizabeth adds gardening, prayer, meditation. Valerie adds doing meditation, listening, reading, writing. Just finished publishing a book number 7. Wow, Valerie, congratulations. That's fantastic. Lauren says positive affirmations. Alice adds getting back to 15 minutes of morning exercise. Yeah, for some of us, it may be a matter of going to bed early enough that we can still get our 7 hours of sleep and then setting our alarm to make sure that we have that habit stack of getting up before maybe others wake up in our house or before we have to get on with our expectations for the day. Susie adds lifting weights. Elizabeth too, cardio. Catherine, thanks for reminding us of positive self-talk. Miriam says walking, going to the beach. Shabana says stretching, stitching. Wow, yeah, great. And meditation, yoga. Suncia, running. Yeah, thank you for that. So many ideas. Walking by the lake. Wow, gosh, it's fun to even picture the environments that each one of us is in, where some people are near lakes, some are near oceans, others are near mountains. And so taking advantage of those things that we have. So perhaps for each of us in the coming months ahead, it's just a matter of recommitting to having a habit stack that includes quality sleep and inner work. Now, sometimes it's not enough for us to do this on our own. We need someone else. We need a counselor. We need a therapist. We need a coach. We need someone else to help us learn and grow in this environment. We need someone to speak into our lives, and so that we can also plan more effectively. Planning for what are the things that I need to do. Often it's a counselor or a coach, but sometimes we can do this on our own as well, is plan, establish what are the actions, what are the steps, what are the resources that I'm going to need to advance me toward that vision that I have in the next 6 months. Now, maybe those plans are going to need to change. We can't be rigid in our plans, especially in this ever-changing and uncertain environment. But yet we can establish some type of plans towards getting us in the direction of the vision that we're trying to achieve. And also learning as we go. Several of us have mentioned in the chat that it's going to be key for us to learn and grow and develop new skills. Carrie, I wonder for you, Carrie Dunsworth, as you're thinking about your vision of clarity, stability for your family and for your work, what's a skill? What's something that if you were to have more of a growth mindset, of course, many of us are aware of Carol Dweck's research at Stanford University suggesting that we can have a growth or a fixed mindset towards learning, and people that have a growth mindset are more successful generally and more effective at reaching their visions than those who have a fixed mindset. If you were to have more of a growth mindset, Carrie, what's something that you would want to learn or grow in the months ahead?
It's a really great question. One thing I really would like to work on and learn more is delegating, time management, really for myself. I tend to think that I can just do everything and take it all on myself. So I'd really like to learn to share out those tasks and duties and just, have help and ask for help and not be afraid to ask for help. So that's really the big thing for me.
Sounds like there's a mindset and a skill set evolution there. That the mindset is the willingness to let go and ask for help. And the skill set is maybe there's something around time management, around how to delegate, how to ask people. There are YouTube videos, there are courses that we can take, and a coach or an instructor can help us. Maybe there's PD that we can do to help us delegate and share with others. Thanks for that. And Hayley, let's put a break in the chat and ask the group, what's something that you would like to learn? We're in the business of education. What's something that we would like to learn? What's something that you would like to learn? Sherry Tolson says, a new language. Mildred adds, time management is important. What's something that you would like to learn? Paul says Spanish. That might get us closer to our vision, having more language ability if we have multilingual classrooms, for example. Ashley says knitting, which it sounds like that's also maybe even a takeaway from an idea to build our inner work. Lauren says time management, starting a business. Yeah, maybe it's a side hustle that we have, better technology, sticking to a budget, that perhaps that will help us in the next 6 to 12 months. Learn acceptance. Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Learning to accept what is, sort of like that, the serenity prayer, this idea of just accepting the things that I can't change and then knowing the difference between what I can and can't change. Cassidy adds budgeting and painting landscapes. Cool. Yeah, that would be certainly something. Learning to not worry about everything. Just a quick plug. I'm with the Dale Carnegie organization, and one of the books that really impacted my life is Dale Carnegie's book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. It's an older book, but I'd recommend it. Pick it up on Amazon for $5. It's a great book on not worrying. Susan adds, I would like to learn how to stretch and do low impact fitness. Yeah. Mary says finding inner peace and helping others. Learning calligraphy, interior decorating. Thanks, Tracy. Yoga, says Sarah. So many things that we can learn. Imagine if in the months ahead, we were to have more of a growth mindset, more of a mindset that I can change. I have this vision for myself. Yes, there's so many things that are challenging and uncertain around me, but I can, as Kim says, learn to play the piano. I can learn to accept the things I don't have control over, as Sandra says. Learn to say no and not feel guilty. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so many things that we can learn. Oftentimes, our learning comes from people around us. I'm learning right now just by reading the chat, listening to Hayley and Carrie and Jamie. This is a way for us to learn. We've chosen to learn by being a part of this conference and by being in this session right now. It's evidence of a growth mindset. And perhaps for each of us, we can continue to connect with people around us that will help us grow, and learn. I wonder for you and for me, who are we going to make sure that we're connected with in the weeks and months ahead? You see, being virtual, being anxious, being uncertain leads to isolation. It leads to us separating ourselves from others in many cases. Now, that may not be true for you. You may be someone that by default goes to others. But I know for me, often when I'm needing connection the most is when I'm most isolated because of my narrow focus on what I have to do and my problems in front of me. Just yesterday, I mentioned I met with a dear friend. He's actually turned into a coach for me. We went for a long walk. And I said to him, John, I'm grateful for our connection. The questions you ask me, the encouragement you give me is so restorative. It's so helpful for me. Can we put scheduled time on our calendars in the coming weeks to make sure that when we go for more walks like this, I need to be connected to you? Perhaps for each of us, we could identify 1 to 2 people who are going to be most important to remain connected to in the weeks and months ahead. I wonder for you, who might that be? Carrie Dunsworth, who's someone for you? You don't need to say their name. If you want to just give us their initials, who's someone for you, either their name or their initials, that you really want to be intentional about staying connected to, about pouring into?
Oh, 100% my mom. Absolutely.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
Oh, she's definitely somebody I lean on and talk to, and she's a great support system for everything. And she's also a teacher, so she helps me with, the kids when it comes to their education, and, helping me see things from, an alternative view, really from the teacher view. So yeah, she is 100% my support.
She sounds really, really special. Hayley, how about you? Who's someone in your world that you want to make sure to stay connected to that will move you towards that vision?
Yeah, I mean, same with Carrie. My mom is my hero. So definitely her. And then also my boyfriend. We just kind of work really, really well together, and we better ourselves and we hold each other accountable. So those are 2 huge people in my life.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. We see a bunch of comments coming in the chat. Let's invite everybody to write in the chat, perhaps just the initials or the first name or the role of that person in your life that you really want to stay connected to. Adina says, my husband. Karen writes, JT. Ashley says, LE. My assistant principal. My husband and mom. I'm getting emotional reading it. Thinking about all of these people, my great friend Peggy, my children, my colleagues, my husband, my sons, my hubby and coworker, my daughter. She's 9, but reminds me to breathe. My kids, my friends, the Caw crew, my grandchildren. What would it look like for us in the coming weeks and months for us to just prioritize staying connected? Even when we're tempted to isolate, when we're tempted to go draw inward with our own insecurities and our own problems, that instead I would say, Del Marie is going to be committed to my daughter's dad. That I'm going to be committed, Maria says, to my kids, my mother, my sibling, and my great friends. That Joanne would be committed to my husband. That Holly would be committed to the squad. That no matter what happens in the weeks and months ahead, that I am going to invest in the squad. If nothing else happens, I am going to be connected to that squad. This is how we emerge stronger. That for each of us, perhaps the way that we can emerge stronger is to take that most important performing enhancing drug, get enough sleep. That we would be intentional about habit stacking to make sure that we're not only getting enough sleep, but that we're doing the inner work on our insides. Such a focus in our society on the outside. And yes, the body fuels the mind, but I wonder, what is it on our insides? And that we would consider working with somebody, a coach, a counselor, a therapist. that we would plan, that we would lay out, even if it needs to change, what do we want to accomplish by when? From X to Y by when? That we would learn, that we would have a growth mindset, that we would learn to stitch, that we would learn yoga, that we would learn to say no, that we would learn Spanish, that we would learn, even if we don't get there in 6 months, at least that we're on a journey, that we would stay connected. This is the way that we emerge stronger. And this is the list of potential actions that each of us could take. You see, the first stage in us moving past the challenges that we're all facing right now, this pier that we feel like we're on, is to take the advice of the Cheshire Cat and identify what is that vision, where do we want to go, and then as we establish that, that we would take these potential actions, that we would consider our thoughts like a river, and that we would choose to focus on the best ones, letting the red thoughts keep going, not beating ourselves up about the red thoughts, not shaming ourselves about the red leaves, but choosing to focus on the green leaves. That we would clarify our boundaries. In the midst of the Facebook group, in the midst of all of the anxiety around us, the desire to rescue people, the desire to become anxious with people, the desire to assume that our thoughts are other people's thoughts, that if other people say they need that, I must need that, that my preferences become convoluted with other people's preferences, but rather that I would know who I am, that I would clarify who I am, that I would have boundaries, that I could say, no, this is who I am. This is my self-definition. That we would remain open. Rather than plugging our ears and getting defensive about, well, that's the administration, that's that teacher. Well, if parents would get more engaged right now, if we had better technology, that instead of having those triggers, that I would remain open and that I would ask questions and I would listen. And despite being triggered and recognizing my triggers, that I'd remain open and that finally I would emerge stronger, that I would build my own capacity during this time, that I would learn, that I would grow, that I would sleep, that I would do inner work, that I would stay connected, and that I would plan with others. I wonder for you, what does this cause you to realize about yourself? What does this cause you to realize about yourself right now? Hayley, how about for you? As we go through these ideas, what do you realize about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely, I'm seeing in the chat that I am strong, and that is very true. And, I saw a lot of chats earlier that were like, that we'll get through this.
Yeah.
And that was something I had never thought about before. But after reading everybody, commenting on the chat, it's like, you guys are right. Like, we're going to be okay. So that, yeah.
Yeah, despite the challenges, I can have agency. I can be empowered to do what I can. I have gotten through other challenges in the past. Carrie, what else are you seeing in the chat or thinking for yourself that you've realized as we go through these ideas?
Yeah, the same thing. You have to be strong for your children, for your students, kind of have that brave face for them. And we're seeing a lot of that. And also, be a fighter, and also that people don't like isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to be intentional about breaking down those barriers of isolation. Let's all reflect on what we've realized about ourselves, why that's important, and now what will we do? In fact, let's go to the chat and reflect on these questions specifically, if you would right now. What will you do? Hayley, would you create another break in the chat, please? And let's each write, based on these realizations, based on, as Michelle says, we are not alone. Julie writes, my health matters. Paul says, I'm trying to keep an open mind. What will we do now? What action will we take? Susie says, the Christopher Robin Poo quote, you're smarter and stronger than you think. I will try to set time for myself. Kathy Ann saying, failure, recognizing failure is part of growth. Sandra writes that focusing on myself and then others. Don says too, quarantine has made me more of an introvert. So perhaps there's parts of that that are okay, and that introversion is okay. As Susan Cain says in her book, Quiet, there are advantages to being introverted. And at the same time, maybe we need to stretch ourselves. Jim writes, watchlessness. Yeah, watch less news. Yeah, watching less news can be important. Reaching out to others, accessing solution. Thanks, Christy, for saying being open to change, focusing on myself first, starting with a positive attitude, writes Jacqueline. And Bob adds, mistakes are valuable because they allow us to be overcomers. We will make mistakes in the coming weeks and months. I'm going to put my oxygen mask on first and then help others, writes Veronice. Yeah, thank you for that. Matthew adds, focusing on solutions instead of introducing and repeating problems. How will I be a solution-oriented person? I will stay open, Lorraine says, to new ways of doing things. Marvin adds, do my best to remain positive and focusing on others. Sativia says, trying to self-reflect on the positive aspects. Thanks, Susan, for writing, there are many others willing to support me if I let them. Will I allow myself to be supported? Will I allow myself to be helped? Lewis says, making the most of every day. And I will think outside the box, writes Matea. Pauline adds, taking the time to learn new ways to complete tasks. No one's a saint. We need to be open, writes Elizabeth. Thank you for that. Maria adds, knowing I can count with my community and I am not alone. Lauren says, creating boundaries without feeling guilty. I will challenge but not frustrate students. Jisoo says, continue to practice mindfulness and smile. So many ideas. Thanks, Kay, for your idea too in the chat. Asking for help. Darlene, being positive. Thoughts to teacher meetings. Staying positive in the months ahead. This may be one of the hardest times of our career. Maybe one of the hardest times of our lives. And yet, as Alice writes in the chat, I wish to share this conference moment with a couple of friends, to take it to somebody else, to connect with the people. As Lydia says, communicate my feelings. Maria writes, listening to classical music. You see, we can't control what happens with the coronavirus. We can't control what happens in our communities. We can't control the decisions, perhaps, that administrators or politicians are going to make. But we can control, as Myra says, how we can see the chat and only the questions. Yeah, thanks for that, Myra. Are we supposed to be able to see the chat or only the questions? That's a great question. I think you can click on the Q&A down below at the bottom of the screen, and that will allow you to see the Q&A, or at least write in the Q&A. And Don says, I want to be someone who builds people up, not tear them down. You see, we have some control to get off the pier, despite all of the challenges and all of the uncertainty. If we make a commitment to following the advice of the Cheshire Cat, to ensuring that as we move forward, that we focus on our best thoughts, that we have metacognition, that we would create boundaries and have self-definition, that we would remain open to change and challenge, and that we would emerge stronger. You see, there's another way to get off the pier. Despite the fact that there may be an end to this bridge, we can fly off the pier. It's just going to require a growth mindset for each of us. Each of us has the ability to grow wings and fly from where we are if we are intentional and focused on the things that we can do and that we can control inside of us and around us. My hope for all of us in the weeks and months ahead is that we would feel empowered, that we would be proactive rather than just reactive to all of the challenges that we're facing. Because as many people have said in the chat, together we can do this. Thank you so much for engaging in our session today, for being vulnerable and candid in the chat. And I am hopeful for all of us. Hayley, please take it back and tell us about the housekeeping items that we now need to know as we go into the rest of the conference.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you so much for that presentation. I saw tons of people in the chat say that they needed this. I needed this. So, and thank you all, everyone, for writing in the chat and interacting with us today. If you enjoyed Matt's presentation, be on the lookout for his forthcoming book, 4 Patterns of Healthy People. Much of what he discussed today is referenced in his book and will be available in September on Amazon and other booksellers. Now, before we end today's morning keynote, I want to run through just a couple more housekeeping items. These are some tips and tricks that will help you have the best possible virtual conference experience. So all of today's sessions will be found on the conference schedule homepage. This link was sent to you via email, but we're going to throw it in the chat right now, so you guys should see that pop up shortly. There we go. Awesome. We suggest you keep that conference schedule open in a tab on your browser for easy access, but don't worry, we are going to provide it at the end of each session. All of today's sessions will be recorded, so you have access to them at a later time. The recordings and many other session-related resources will be provided to you via email once they are available next week. And if at any point today you're having technical issues or you have questions outside of your session presentations or any other general questions, please email promotions@edmentum.com. We have some rock star mentors who are monitoring that inbox all day to help you the best they can. At the end of today's final breakout sessions, we're going to upload that certificate of attendance on the conference homepage. This is where you'll find that certificate for participating in today's conference. And then as you exit each session today, you have the opportunity to provide feedback via survey. Please take a minute to fill that out because feedback is truly appreciated. Now, it looks like we're coming up on time, so let's go ahead and wrap up this morning keynote. Don't forget to grab that conference homepage link in the chat. And so you can get to your next breakout session. And thanks again, everyone. Thank you so much, Matt. You are amazing. And let's have a great conference. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.